So we're going to get started with our CivicSpark and COP23 webinar. If first I could please have folks chat into the question bar at the side of your screen to let me know if you can hear my voice okay, and if you can see the slides up on the screen. Excellent. Thank you all so much. Okay, so as usual, please chat in any questions that you have through the question bar at the side of the screen. Really looking forward to the conversation today. And as I mentioned on my email, we're joined this morning by Fei and Justin Marquez, CivicSpark Fellows from the class of 2016 and 2017, respectively. And as I mentioned, Fei organized the U.S. People's Delegation to COP23 in Bonn, and Justin was a U.S. People's Delegate. So we've all chatted, and we thought this would be a great opportunity for you all to hear what both the planning process was like for the U.S. People's Delegation, and also what the atmosphere with the conversation was like, and what it was like to be a delegate at COP23. And I shared both Fei and Justin's bios with you this morning, and they'll be giving some more background information about themselves and who they are and the work that they're doing now and before when they were CivicSpark Fellows. But we're going to be kicking it off with Fei first, who's going to be talking about the role that they played in putting this delegation together, what that process was like, what the planning was like for that. And then Fei is going to be passing it off to Justin, who's going to be talking a little bit more about that on the ground experience of being at the conference of parties. And from there, we're going to have a good amount of time at the end of the webinar for a conversation for you all to ask any questions at all that you have about this experience. And I'm just really excited to have the chance to have two former fellows on the line to talk about such a cool event. So thank you both, Fei and Justin, for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it off to Fei to get us started.
All right, cool. Well, it's great to be back here. I presented a few times earlier in the fall for different trainings. So you've probably heard my voice, if not met me in person. But as Kristen said, I was a fellow in 15-16. I was working with the city of Emeryville to develop their Common Action Plan 2.0, which involved doing their greenhouse gas inventory, coming up with different strategies for the different areas in Emeryville, and helping implement a couple of the projects. So since I finished my fellowship, I did a brief stint as an intern with the city, and then I got brought on to ICLEI to support all cities across the U.S. on various climate and sustainability work. And so one of the projects I ended up working on was the U.S. People's Delegation. And then, yeah, I guess we can just get started. Okay, sorry. Okay, so this really got kicked off last June when Trump made the announcement on June 1st that the U.S. was going to be leading the Paris Agreement in 2020. So this was something that we've been anticipating. We've been hearing news about the announcement for a few months beforehand. So ICLEI, Climate Nexus, and a few other organizations who were behind We Are Still In were able to mobilize relatively quickly because we kind of were planning something in response to the leaving. So the We Are Still In campaign went live 4 days after the announcement. And so the We Are Still In campaign really was to represent how the U.S. Subnational organizations like universities, states, counties, cities, we really wanted to show our commitment to climate action and the different components of the Paris Agreement, so mentioning We Are Still In. And so with the launching of the campaign, almost within like the first week, there were over 1,200 signatories, which included 200 cities and 9 states. What this really represented was a lot of momentum for climate action, and a lot of the cities and states that signed on hadn't before shown any particular public commitment to climate action before. So it was really exciting on that front that we were able to get a public commitment from all these cities that hadn't really, been as committed before. So on our ICLEI end, we really wanted to capture some of the momentum from where we are still in, and thinking about how we could use that to further climate action. So one of the things that we were thinking about was COP23, which was coming up in November in Germany. So we came up with the idea to use a essay contest to select delegates to come up with a delegation to send to Germany. So this was something that we've never done before. Traditionally, ICLEI has worked only with cities. We don't usually work with individual residents or with the public. So this was kind of completely brand new territory for all of us. So we had a couple different categories for the essay. For youth under 25 years old, representatives from EJ communities, small cities, large cities, and open. And of course, we were able to publicize on the CivicSpark serve as well. So we ended up selecting 7 different folks. Bridget, who was from New Orleans, she's a water board planner. Cade, who is a youth activist from the Arctic and was a former U.S. Arctic Circle ambassador. Daisy, who is a college student in Berkeley, who has participant on one of ICLEI's pilot projects in Hayward. Oh, now I've forgotten her name. Shoot. A really great activist from Richmond, Virginia, who is the co-founder of Deanna, who is a co-founder of Sunrise Movement, a youth climate activist organization all across the U.S. And of course, Justin from CivicSpark, who will be speaking shortly. Rhiannon, who is a climate activist from Colorado, who's been organizing across purple communities and really trying to bridge across the different political spectrum. And Scott, who is a sustainability manager from Urbana, Illinois. So really trying to get like a wide range of folks from across different geographic regions and also different communities and perspectives, and really trying to highlight the different stories that were coming up. So ICLEI partnered with 350 to send our delegation, and 350 then organized all different coalitions from different EJ communities to come together as the People's Delegation. So this was really just a platform for all of us to show what climate leadership was looking like, and also to bring together all the different grassroots groups and nonprofits come together. So there were a couple of different mainline messaging components that we came up with, and this was all coming from mainly 350, who is organizing all of this. But some of the things that we were thinking about was really to call on U.S. elected officials to step up in meaningful ways, seeing that the current administration is rolling back on climate protections. So calling on officials to talk about how they're going to step up in terms of climate protections, the current climate crises, like we saw Houston and Puerto Rico and a few other crises happening leading up to Bonn. So that was really pertinent at the time. And also the impact of existing inequalities and negligence to frontline communities, and really calling for that just and equitable transition to 100% renewable energy. So this was really in line with all the values that we're speaking of. One of the things that did come up was that ICLEI, being a national organization and being nonpartisan, some of the messaging that the other organizations wanted for that was actually more aggressive than what our organization wanted. And that was kind of frustrating, as me an individual and as some of the other staff is, because we as individuals might completely agree and this is what we do outside of work. I organize and I do a lot of work with queer people of color groups, and that's the type of messaging I would say. But as a staff person, I actually can't say anything against the Clinton administration, because there are cities that we support who are in red states and who can't actually, sign on to a campaign where we're calling out something like that. So we really had to try and find a balance in terms of the messaging component, and make sure that we're being supportive in like really general terms, and thinking about like what we can do in terms of highlighting stories and highlighting like those like solutions rather than just being on attack the whole time. There were a few other process and challenge things that did come up. We were crowdfunding to get all of the delegates out to Bonn. And for those of you who haven't done crowdfunding planning before, it's a very different set of skills. And it really requires a lot of planning to do. So like I'd done a lot of crowdfunding before, like, as a supporter and like other kinds of like fundraising, like outside of my work, but it was a very different experience to lead a crowdfunding campaign. We didn't get a lot of momentum on the crowdfunding when we initially started off, and that led to a lot of difficulty in getting pledges when we really needed to. And it was kind of stressful getting the minimum amount needed to get the delegates to Bonn. We initially said that we're going to aim for around $2,000 per delegate. I think we only end up with about 50% of that. So I think like moving forward, like just really planning ahead when you're trying to do crowdfunding would have been really useful. And just if you're ever thinking about doing crowdfunding for work as when you're volunteering or as a nonprofit or outside of CivicSpark, but yeah, really plan it out because it takes a lot of time to get a successful campaign. Then there were also a lot of logistical challenges too. We were organizing 7 different speaking opportunities for our delegates, which included 2 large events like a town hall and a speak out. And a lot of those involved a lot of moving pieces, largely because we were coordinating with 4 different organizations. So there was ICLEI and 350, and we were coordinating with our own delegates. And then 350 was then coordinating with the other, 10 or so organizations that were part of the delegation. So we had to coordinate around that. The We Are Still In campaign had its own pavilion outside of the COP23. So because the US wasn't officially sending like a real delegation, We Are Still In brought its own pavilion. So we were trying to fit everything into that agenda and, fit into the programming and try to figure out the right dates and stuff. And then ICLEI actually had its own pavilion as well. So ICLEI has one of the few networks that have official sponsorship for the UNFCCC. So they had a pavilion for cities and regions that's national or international for all cities and regions across the world. So we had to coordinate among all those different levels. And it was really challenging to think about like all the moving pieces for the 2-week program, thinking about coordinating with the elected officials and getting them to commit to attending to the town hall, making sure that our messaging was online, making sure that folks had needed training, and then trying to coordinate international travel for all of our delegates. Even though the 2 of us, ICLEI staff people who were mainly coordinators, wouldn't actually be there on the ground. So we had to put together a logistics package for all the delegates so that they could be there and not be kind of left adrift when they land. So it was quite a project to work on. But hopefully Justin and the others had a good time. So now I'm going to pass it on to Justin for him to talk about what it was like to be on the ground.
Okay. Hi, this is Justin, and I'm trying to figure out screen share. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, Fei, and thank you, Kristen. Again, my name is Justin, Justin Marquez, and I was a CivicSpark Fellow in 2017 with the city of El Cerrito, working on different climate action planning initiatives, including a greenhouse gas inventory and an LED light project, among other things. And it is for that work that I applied to the ICLEI USA People's Delegation to COP23 and talking about the real incredible work that cities like El Cerrito and the Bay Area are doing and the work that CivicSpark is doing that actually brought me to Bonn for COP23. So yeah, just want to start off by thanking Fei and Kristen both for CivicSpark as well as for the work done with ICLEI. It really was an incredible experience, and I'm excited to share more with you guys in this webinar. So yeah, right now I currently work at MCE, which is the first community choice aggregator in California. We are a public agency that provides electricity with a baseline of 55% renewable energy sources for our electricity service, and we service the counties of Marin, Napa, and Contra Costa, and as well as the city of Benicia in Solano County. And I joined MCE through Climate Corps, which is another sort of temporary fellowship program that helps get folks into climate action and environmental roles throughout the state of California. And I'm really excited to be at MCE. There's a lot of really interesting work being done in the energy space and helping revolutionize, really spark a renewable energy revolution in the state of California. And a lot of that work as well is what I talked about at COP23 as a part of a speaking event and talking about California's leadership. But, you know, very basically, what is COP23? Fei covered most of this, but yeah, it was in November. It was in Bonn, and an interesting thing is that it's hosted by the government of that says Fuji. It should be Fiji. And it was a convening of the international community to talk about what are the next steps in climate action for our planet, and what can our governments do to take meaningful climate action steps. And as Fei talked about as well, there are two different zones at COP23. You have the Bula zone, which is where the high-level talks occur, and that's where the delegations from the national governments come and convene and discuss what are those next steps and what are they going to do and bring back to their countries. And then you also have the Bonn zone, which you can see on the right, which is where a lot of the NGOs and other stakeholders held their own event spaces, as well as booths, and many different countries hosted their own pavilions as well as a way to showcase what are the unique climate action initiatives being undertaken in their countries. So it was simultaneously a place to sort of brag about what are these great steps that different countries and organizations and companies are taking, but also a chance for the international community to network around new technologies, new policies, and really meet each other as well. So you have these dual zones, and as Fei mentioned as well, the United States, which had typically had a climate pavilion in the Bonn zone, or the equivalent of the Bonn zone in other COPs, didn't have that same level of commitment this year around. However, as Fei mentioned, there was a contingent of American leaders in the public sector, the private sector, and nonprofit sector coming together to say we are still in, and they wanted their voices, the voices of millions of Americans still committed to the Paris Climate Accord, to be present. And the city of Bonn actually granted a permit to this American delegation that was sort of unofficial to have this pavilion exist right outside of the Bula zone. So it was definitely really interesting to see all the setup for the official talks, for the high-level talks, and right next to it, having this American bubble of climate action. It literally was a bubble, a large dome. And it was metaphorical in that sense, but also just the proximity to the official talks was to show that America really is still in, and there is the equivalent of the third largest economy in the world committed to meaningful climate action in many different ways in many different sectors. So yeah, this is just something I took from the We Are Still In website that kind of outlines exactly who is still in. You know, this is a huge portion of the international economy. After the US as a whole, after the economy of China, this contingent of leaders that represent state governments, local governments, nonprofits, private sector companies coming together, this is a huge, significant economic power. And that means that it is a huge, significant power when it comes to taking climate action, when it comes to committing to renewable energy, to you know, better consumption practices. And it was just definitely incredible and inspiring to see this come together, sort of as a reaction to the lack of delegation from the Trump administration. And yeah, so I was there as a part of ICLEI USA's portion of the US People's Delegation. They already went over who these incredible leaders are in the picture next, in this picture that you see. And it was really exciting just to get to know these folks over email, but also to meet them in Bonn and see what is their work. Because for me, I'm originally from Chicago, and I came to California, and specifically the Bay Area, because I wanted to be in a place where climate action and environmental policy is progressive and is taking off. And these are folks from around the country where that isn't necessarily the environment or space, where these are where you're fighting against politics, economics, and all these other factors that come into play that don't necessarily that don't hinder the work that some of us in California get to do. Not that there isn't things that hinder the work that we do here in California through CivicSpark or in this environmental space, but to share our stories with the other members of this People's Delegation and to share best practices as well was really exciting. So I was really grateful to meet these folks. They're really smart leaders and definitely inspiring as well. As a sort of side note, through Diana, who was founder of Sunrise Movement, I learned more about Sunrise, and there's now a Sunrise Bay Area chapter, and I'm thinking to get more involved. So it was really exciting just to have this networking opportunity, even on a small scale within the delegation. So looking at the larger delegation, it included many other environmental justice organizations. We took the town hall with local government leaders, and that was hosted by ICLEI USA. Apologies if there's some background noise. I'm in San Francisco right now after attending a meeting at the Public Utilities Commission, but I had to run over to a place where I could get some Wi-Fi. There we go. Yeah, so then this picture includes not only the ICLEI portion of the U.S. People's Delegation, but also members of the delegation from the larger People's Delegation, which is comprised, like I said, of environmental justice leaders and activists. And Fei was alluding to this before in terms of the planning side of, well, how do we decide what is the position of this U.S. People's Delegation? How do we frame what this delegation is here to do, and what actions and steps they can take while in Bonn? And that sort of tension between the institutionalist point of view of ICLEI and the maybe non-institutional point of view from a lot of these other organizations was also apparent in the delegation. I think there were some folks that didn't see the government as an ally in this climate action fight, and there are many great reasons to believe so. And from personal experience, a lot of these activists are bringing their narrative into the fold and have talked about why they are working sort of outside of the institutions to make climate action and environmental justice a reality. So I think it was even that much more important for folks like myself, like Scott from Champaign, Illinois, to Daisy, who's doing internships and doing work with the city of Hayward, to speak about, what is the role that local government can play? How is California, as a larger institution, assisting these local governments in achieving their greenhouse gas emission goals? And it's through programs like CivicSpark. It's through programs that provide funding for grants, for electric vehicle infrastructure, for a whole host of energy efficiency projects. There's so many other ways in which local government and state government have assisted this climate action fight and movement. And I think it's really representative, this people's delegation, that it's both the activists and those working outside of the institution, as well as those making change within an institution to push things forward. So this was, I think, a really great picture because it also speaks across the country.
Hi, Justin. You're breaking up a little bit. If you could, we heard, you look at this picture and then you cut out.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. Well, if you look at this picture, it's representative of the partnership between environmental justice activism and institutional change within local governments to move forward meaningful. And I just wanted to point out in this picture, if you can see this woman here, if you see my mouse cursor in the blue jacket, she was an awesome speaker, and she's a county board supervisor from, I forget the name of the county, but it's the county where Austin, Texas is located, as well as behind me is the area of a lot of the cool issues happening in Pittsburgh, especially as a city that is sort of considered a part of the Rust Belt, sort of an icon of industrial America, and looking at the ways it can reinvent that image and taking this green economy, green collar jobs seriously, and making renewable energy and renewable energy technologies long-term. This was ask questions and push our elected representatives to speak about what are the ways that you are doing this work, but also what more should you be doing? What more can you be doing? Renewable energy technology.
Hi, Justin.
Hi.
Sorry about that. We're losing you a little bit. We get a couple words that are clear and then you're breaking up.
Okay.
I know that you're in a tough spot location-wise, but I don't know if you're able to move around a little bit so we can get a bit of a clearer signal, but that would be great.
Yeah, I will try this. Okay. I'll just move on real quick. Okay, is this any better?
I can hear you clear now. Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Gosh, how to move on real quickly. So this set of pictures happened during Governor Jerry Brown's speech in the Climate Action Center. And there were members of the U.S. People's Delegation who disrupted and had direct action to disrupt Governor Jerry Brown's speech. And I think this was a really excellent opportunity to sort of think about what California is and what is California as this quote-unquote environmental leader. You have Jerry Brown, who is the governor of California, touting all the big strides that many of us as CivicSpark Fellows and alum have seen happen at the local level. And then you also see these environmental justice activists who are pushing our leadership to say this is not enough, that California is doing great things, but there's so much more that we need to do to ensure that we don't emit any more greenhouse gases into our atmosphere, and that people of color and disadvantaged communities who are most affected by the effects of climate change are thought of, their voices are heard, and they're equally thought of. So I included these pictures. I think it was a funny one to see Jerry Brown pointing at activists. It kind of looks more authoritarian than it actually was. Jerry Brown, in his speech itself, was actually lauding the activists, sort of a, he's a politician, but also recognizing that this is what California is. It's a people. It's made up of communities that will continue to push and strive for more. So although California and many of us, again, as CivicSpark Fellows throughout the state, are helping implement meaningful climate action work at the local level, there's so much more that can be done. And specifically, this direct action was to sort of protest the continued support of natural gas infrastructure and new natural gas infrastructure within the state. And yeah, so, while a CivicSpark Fellow, I got to work with the city of El Cerrito on a lot of the things that El Cerrito was doing. And it was really exciting to share my experience as a CivicSpark Fellow. You can see the AmeriCorps California symbol behind me. And I think it was a really great perspective to bring into this room. You had a lot of folks talking about personal narratives around what climate change has done to affect their communities. One of the more powerful speeches came, I think, from two activists from the U.S. Marshall Islands talking about not just colonialism and systems of oppression within their community, but also the detrimental effects of sea level change and of climate change that are happening today. So it really brought home sort of this personal narrative aspect of what climate action is and why we're doing this work. And I was also really excited to share that there's really great work being done in cities like El Cerrito, going, with an organization like MCE to go higher levels of renewable energy. And yeah, so I just have a few more pictures to share. This was taken after the People's Delegation Speak Out, in which I had a chance to talk about my work in El Cerrito, and then we had folks from Puerto Rico, from Texas, from different indigenous nations speaking on behalf of their communities and also speaking to their own personal stories about why we're still in, why climate action is necessary and needed right now. And yes, just some more pictures from the event itself. And yeah, thank you. And I'm happy to answer any and all questions after this. So I'm going to throw this back to Fei. Apologies again for going sort of in and out with my phone. Hopefully, no more future problems like that. But yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. I'm going to pass screen sharing back over to Fei.
All right, so I'm just gonna quickly talk about where we are still in is right now. So as Justin mentioned, now there's over 2,700 signatories, which it's now doubled, which includes now faith groups and tribes. And COP23 was really shown to be a successful moment in amplifying the message around climate action across the U.S. There was really good receival of the U.S. Climate Action Center outside of the official Bonn and Bula zones. And Rio Line showed that they had strikes in a lot of different areas. So in looking at the coming year, Rio Line is going to be working as a coalition of coalitions, trying to build on those existing networks that already have across the universities, the cities, and so on. So there's three main strategies that they'll be focusing on in the coming year. So they want to be generating the actions from these sub-actional actors, which includes the cities and universities and the tribes and so on. So they don't want this to be just another sign-on campaign, but rather to have some sort of thing where we can have high impact and low burden and really focusing on implementation. So we'll see what that actually looks like. And as most of you know, the summit, Governor Brown's summit in September is going to be one of the major events coming up in this coming year. So there's going to be a lot of different place-based events, conferences, university-led technical workshops that will be kind of building momentum up to the September summit. So a lot of us who were helping organize COP23 are also kind of getting tagged into the climate summit and organizing messaging around that. So in the coming months, we'll be seeing more kind of strategy around that. And especially in terms of integrating lesser heard voices too. I personally think that's a really high priority for me to, uplift those frontline communities and making sure that some of the themes that we saw in the People's Delegation is going to be heard in the climate summit as well. So on a different note, I want to show kind of where We Are Still In fits in with all of the different reporting platforms and commitments that happened. There's a number of different commitments that are out there. So there's We Are Still In, Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, Climate Mayors, and Chicago Climate Charter. A few of those have reporting disclosure commitments to them. So of the reporting platforms, there's CDP and Carbon. And just at COP23, it was decided that CDP and Carbon are now going to merge rather than having two different platforms. They will now talk to each other. So the infrastructure for how that works is still being worked out. But now, rather than choosing one over the other, it will supposedly link up. And then at the aggregate level, there's these two platforms that supposedly will track what all the different nations are doing in terms of their emissions reporting. So I'm not entirely familiar with those two other platforms, but I generally work with Carbon and CDP. So if any of your cities are reporting to that, you can come and chat with me about it. There is also this really helpful table that I grabbed from an article that came out just recently comparing the different commitments and how they compare and contrast. So I'll just leave that there for all of you in case you are at a city that is working on any of this. And that's it. So we can now just go to questions.
Fine. Well, thank you both so much. Really appreciate that and excited for all the questions. And fellows, please keep sending them in. So we're going to kick it off with a question for both of you. The question starts, Justin, you mentioned that the We're Still In members constitute the third largest economy in the world. And that's definitely reason for hope, but in the meantime, the EU is pushing to end future trade deals with non-signatories of the Paris Agreement. So for both of you, Justin and Fei, do you have some thoughts or insights on the ways local governments can put pressure as large economic forces on the federal government, or do you see that as a role that's more reserved for activists and activist organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when it comes to, I'll speak for myself, but I think sort of in the climate that we're in right now, I see sort of local governments in California taking on this role sort of without the federal government. So putting pressure on the EPA or the Department of Energy. I don't know what entity within the state. You have a lot of leadership that can be successful in Sacramento, and perhaps maybe at the federal level, activists and those working outside of the government institution might have more flexibility in that regard. So it's a good question and something I think would be.
Yeah, I think like for me, like I want to broaden the definition of what an activist looks like. So since the elections, there has been a group that doesn't really have a name. I think it's just an informal group that's organizing around state and local level and frontline communities, and like the response to climate action and from the federal government. So this group is like comprised of like city staff, different like environmental groups, nonprofits like us, and they're just all trying to come up with like responses to like what the federal government is doing. So like kind of ranges from trying to figure out where the infrastructure needs are, where the resource needs, how do we support what the states and the local governments are doing, how do we fill the gap where the federal government isn't doing that. So all of that can be seen as activism. Like it's, advocacy in one way or another. So I don't want people to think that in order to be an activist, you have to be like on the ground, like, marching in the streets or whatever. Like there is a lot of activism and advocacy that you can do, like as someone like who signs on to like pledge or like making sure that your elected officials are like actually speaking out in the appropriate context, or making sure that your policies are actually being implemented. So I think that there's a lot of different spaces to advocate for different climate actions and so on that doesn't necessarily have to involve like being out there and being like on the ground and marching and so on.
And real quick, just to add on to toot ICLEI's horn a little bit, ICLEI as an organization has really done so much to skill share, to share best practices among different local governments and different city staff from around the country and around the world. So I think in that way too, you have sort of, people coming together and figuring out what are the ways that they, this might work, like community choice aggregation might work in Illinois, or how it might work in New Orleans, or whatever it may be. So definitely, just wanted to add that bit. And ICLEI's doing really awesome work as well.
Thanks, Justin.
And another follow-up to that, so Fei, you mentioned that ICLEI is starting to think a little bit more about strategies for the Governor's Climate Summit and more in 2018. I don't know if there's anything that you're able to share now about what some of the strategies are that you're going to be using, or if you've really been thinking about that yet. But I know the summit's something a lot of fellows are really interested in, and LGC starting to think about. So it would be cool to hear what ICLEI's thinking.
Yeah, we're kind of in a holding pattern. Like the last month, like a lot of folks were just kind of waiting to see like what the organizing people were going to come forward with. We haven't heard anything in terms of like the proposal submissions or anything. Michael McCormick did just get officially designated as one of the organizers. So he's going to be passing on like call outs and such, and like to be an open air for like any of the things that we want to put forward. Me personally, like we haven't had an organizational chat about this yet, but me personally, it's like, again, like I'm really invested in highlighting the needs of frontline communities and really bringing together probably like some coalition similar to People's Delegation again, and working with 250 to make sure that, those different organizations, first process groups can make it to the summit and make sure that those voices are heard. I think that something like the town hall was really effective. Like we heard a lot of feedback afterwards saying that a lot of people were really engaged during that kind of event, and it was really kind of broke the traditional dynamic that happens in conferences. So I think something like that would be great to do again. And yeah, just to make sure that like we can bring in as many different people as possible, well, would be good.
And do you have any plans to organize another U.S. People's Delegation or other delegations for future conference parties?
Yeah, not this year, just because we have a few other international events going on. Probably next year would be the next one that we'll be looking at. But yeah, ICLEI usually attends every so often. It was definitely a huge lift to do it this past year. because like it wasn't really something that we've done before. We're trying to figure out the card funding thing, trying to coordinate with 250 and so on. So I think now that we have a better sense of like how much time and resources it takes, we'll have a better sense of like how much we can put forward to like that in the future.
Excellent, thank you. So the next question's for Justin. Could you talk a little bit about what your reception was from other countries as a delegate from sort of the unofficial American delegation? Was that dynamic something that other attendees were talking about with you or other delegates?
Yeah, that was one of the, I don't know if anyone saw, but I was wearing a pin that said America is still in, which was part of the purpose of having this people's delegation was just to have bodies and representatives of sort of an average American citizen, people who aren't elected, folks that do care about these issues. So we were trying really hard to sort of spread that message and talk to as many people as we could. And the reception was definitely interesting. There were folks who would immediately, assume that maybe we aligned with sort of the federal government's position on the Paris Climate Accords or on climate change in general. So it took like probably a few sentences to really sort of establish, hey, no, I'm here and fully in support of what is the majority of the international community's stance on taking climate change seriously and implementing renewable energy. So met folks from, it's like a lot of different countries, and definitely having to explain that we're part of a larger group of Americans who are still behind this work. But overall, once you got over that hump, people were very receptive and thankful that we were there. So that was also great to have. It's great to hear. Hello?
Sorry about that. I was on mute and was talking away. So somebody else was wondering, as a follow-up to that, how much you and the other 6 U.S. People's delegates interacted with some of the other folks there who were part of that unofficial American delegation.
Yeah, we had several events together. Some were just dinners to get to know each other, as well as participating in official delegation events, including, as we were talking about earlier, the U.S. People's Delegation Speak Out, where there was just, I think, about 2 hours of different narratives told at the U.S. Climate Action Center. And then it was also the town hall with elected officials, in which the U.S. People's Delegation asked questions and got to interact with our different local government officials from around the country. So through those 2 events, and then also through different social things, we got to meet a lot of these folks and really hear their story about why they got involved with environmental justice. And oftentimes these are folks that are coming from communities of color, that are coming from places like Puerto Rico that are most recently hit by devastating storms, which are linked to climate change. So you see this really personal narrative inside of things that was special to share, and that's something that's public but also really intimate and personal. So I feel very fortunate to have gotten to know these people. I added a lot of them on Facebook, so have some new social media friends around the country, we tried to foster as many sort of relationship building opportunities during our time in Bonn as well. And again, like I mentioned, I heard about an organization that was popping up here in the Bay Area because of someone I met at the U.S. People's Delegation. So I was grateful for that.
Excellent. And so a follow-up for that, it sounds like folks are interested in hearing what the follow-up was afterwards. So I think for you, Justin, obviously there were a lot of informal connections, but were there any more substantial, next steps or follow-ups or groups that were forming as a result to keep the conversation going?
Yeah, in terms of the organized next steps, none really. More so connecting with folks and then figuring out what are the ways that we can virtually support each other or support each other whenever we're again in the same place. That's part of the thing, is that this delegation, not just the ICLEI part of it, but the whole part was we're scattered around the country. So what are the ways that we can support each other's movements? And then also, how can we integrate this work into our professional careers? So I think especially for me, more the next steps were bringing this back to my public agency, which is MCE, and seeing that there are a lot of the similar needs within communities of color, within disadvantaged communities that are part of MCE service area, and doing more to connect with them, which I think MCE has done made some good strides, but there's also more that we can do to be supportive of local environmental justice movements and advocacy. Well, maybe not advocacy, we are a public agency, but more to support these environmental justice communities. So officially, sort of kind of just things happen, or we just went to COP, and then no sort of concrete next steps, but definitely I've found next steps in my own personal next steps.
Great. And I'll pass the same question to you as well, Fei. Was there any sort of follow-up from ICLEI's perspective? Did you chat with the delegates afterwards, or was it really more the presence of being there and some of the legwork that you put in ahead of time that was the primary focus?
Yeah. I mean, we did have a couple of debrief talks with 350 and the rest of the People's Delegation and with our own delegates. There wasn't a ton of like concrete actions, as Justin said. 350 was definitely like the other coordinator for this, like spent a lot of time working on getting the delegation ready. So she like ended up pretty much like being out like the rest of the year. So we're just kind of ramping back up and getting ready for the summit. I think everybody's kind of looking at the summit as the next big thing. So I think in terms of like relationship building, we're just like, continuing those lines of conversation and maintaining those partnerships and looking to see like who's going to be interested in moving ahead towards the summit. So there's that component. And then trying to, like, as Justin kind of said, like integrate those values into like my own work. There's a couple projects I'm working on right now that like I think is good to kind of be really cognizant of like what frontline communities really need, and to make sure that environmental justice like really integrated into the program design, and to make sure that like to walk the walk when you're like doing a delegation like that, to like bring in all the principles that you want to see like into the projects that we're actually doing. So nothing completely related to like the stories or anything that came out of COP, but like looking ahead to like maintaining those relationships for the summit, and then kind of like carrying those themes and other projects.
Great. So with the last 3 minutes, we got questions about sort of your experience with CivicSpark Fellows and your transition to what came next. So I'm going to take the last couple of minutes to pivot to that. And if you don't mind, could you share a little bit about what your job search experience was after CivicSpark, and if there are any lessons learned that you could share with the cohort? That would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah. So I started applying to things, I guess, at the beginning of summer, looking ahead to the fall end. And it was definitely easier than what my previous job search experience was, since like you meet so many of the people that you're going to be working with like during your fellowship. So Michael McCormick knew my name. a lot of the people that within the Bay Area knew that I was applying for things. And so a lot of them were really kind of like cheerleaders in terms of like, oh, okay, I know that this spot is open. Let me like write a recommendation for you. So that was really helpful and supportive, and really like kind of affirmed that the work that we were doing was really good. I guess my experience is going to be probably a little anonymous to most of you, because I was able to get an internship experience at Emeryville, because like my boss liked me enough that they created an internship position, and I was able to get it. And then from there, ICLEI kind of headhunted me. So that's probably not going to be the case for most people, unfortunately. But I think in terms of like what is useful, just really relying on your networks that you develop here through CivicSpark is really good. Don't be afraid to like tell people that, hey, like I'm going to be looking for work. Can you like keep an eye out for opportunities for me, or put in a good word or something, like use your networks that you develop, and just kind of like go through those to find opportunities. And then also, like, to your other question about how it is life now outside of CivicSpark, I really enjoy my position now. I think it's a good position in terms of like being able to meet a lot of different people in a lot of different contexts, because I'm not working in one city anymore. I get to see a lot of different things, not just in California, but also across the US, which is quite different landscape. And I also get a lot of flexibility in terms of the projects that I choose to do. Like my boss understands that I have a really deep commitment to intellectual justice, and she kind of lets me lead and build out that program area as I kind of see fit. So I really am grateful to have that that opportunity to really dive into that, because it's probably not the case in every organization that people recognize that EJ is a major issue to be addressed. So I'm really grateful to be an organization to be able to do that.
Thank you, Fei. And Justin, in the last minute or so, do you have any thoughts or tips to share?
Yeah, I think Fei, you're right on the head. Networking as a word is kind of off-putting, but it is really helpful. And just in terms of being a part of CivicSpark, you're already tapped into an incredibly strong network that is there to help and for you to utilize. Definitely, as my fellowship was wrapping up, after attending different conferences as a CivicSpark Fellow, I was able to have coffee chats with folks that worked in private sector energy consulting, or worked in electric vehicle infrastructure startups, and those coffee chats were helpful. One, to build a network, but also having more experience talking about what I do and understanding better what is the landscape of jobs that exist for what's next. So understanding what job titles to search for, what sort of experience translates well between local government and an electric vehicle infrastructure startup company. And ultimately, the position I ended up taking, I was excited to take, was with MCE, which is the Community Choice Aggregation Program, like I mentioned. I worked closely with one of my bosses now on doing the greenhouse gas inventory, the electricity portion of it for the city of El Cerrito. And right now, MCE is expanding into Contra Costa County, and a lot of those same skill sets were very necessary for this sort of expansion process. So I had something that was very marketable for them, something that was useful within that organization. And so right now, I do a lot of that work, some different data analysis, doing greenhouse gas inventories, and doing some 100% renewable cost-benefit analysis. But I also have a lot of community engagement aspects to my role, which is exciting. So for me, I found a place where I get to, exercise my community engagement muscle, but also get behind a computer and work on Excel, which is also fun. But I know the job search is tough, and as the fellowship is starting to enter its second half, like getting resumes ready and doing mock interviews and getting coffee chats and networking is a tedious process, but it's one that you will ultimately survive and ultimately thrive afterwards. And I'll speak for myself, but definitely if folks want to talk more about this offline, or if they want to send over a resume, I'm more than happy to help with that process as well. I'm a very proud CivicSpark alum, so any way I can help.
Well, with that, we are out of time. I think we could probably talk for another hour, but I really appreciate both of you taking the time this morning to chat with us. Thank you so, so much. And I will share your contact information out with the fellows. So if any of you have questions for Fei or for Justin, you can reach out. But thank you both so much. Really excited to have you on the line today. And thank you for all that you've done and continue to do for CivicSpark Fellows and for this movement. So really appreciate you both.
Yep. Well,
thank you, Kristen.
All right, well, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good luck.